Next one, Mr. Morawski.
If we could skip ahead to C-1505, the attorney for that case is here, Mr. Coffey.
And he represents who?
He represents Mr. Russo, Ed Russo, in C-1505. C-1505 is actually part of a trilogy of cases, which included C-1504 and C-1506. They were all filed by the same individual, and C-1505 is against a gentleman named Ed Russo. 1504 was against now presidential candidate Donald Trump, and 1506 was filed against our mayor, Carlos Jimenez, mayor of Miami-Dade County.
The only one you're dealing with right now is Mr. Russo.
Yeah, but just to give you a little bit of background, they're all sort of related to each other. Basically, the allegations were that some time ago, Mr. Trump and the mayor were playing golf together at Crandon Park, and it came up during the conversation that Mr. Trump thought Crandon Park golf course was in horrible disrepair, and the mayor wasn't taking good care of it, and that Trump could turn it into a world-class golf resort. They had some discussions about whether Trump could buy it. The mayor advised him that it's public property, he couldn't buy it, but perhaps he could manage it, and that there was a procedure in place that Mr. Trump could submit what's called an unsolicited proposal to the county, and he could make the proposal to upgrade the facilities and perhaps come to some sort of management agreement. A letter was sent on behalf of the county to Mr. Trump's organization. They responded to it. Some discussions ensued, wherein Mr. Ed Russo comes into the picture. Mr. Russo was hired by Mr. Trump to come to the county and find out what needed to be done to make this golf course deal happen. And Mr. Russo, in fact, met with several county individuals, including Jack Cardis, the director of the Parks Department. Mr. Russo, in fact, did meet with Bruce Matheson, who is a member of the Crandon Park Master Plan Advisory Committee. If you know a little bit of the history of Miami-Dade County, the Matheson family gave all of that property on Key Biscayne to Miami-Dade County in a trust, and so anything that happens to that property has to go through the advisory committee and be approved before anything can change according to the agreement between the Matheson family and the county. Mr. Russo did in my opinion, lobby Mr. Matheson. He met with him and discussed the Trump proposal with him to try to get his approval of it. And in fact, Mr. Russo did appear before the CPAC Advisory Committee in December of 2014, again to advise them of the Trump proposal and to answer any questions that they may have had. Subsequently, Mr. Russo, when he did learn about the complaint being filed against him, he did properly register as a lobbyist. He did come and take our lobbyist course. However, he should have registered, in my opinion, as a lobbyist much sooner, certainly before he appeared before the advisory committee. So my recommendation is that there is probable cause to find that Mr. Russo failed to register as a lobbyist. However, I am recommending that the complaint be dismissed and that he be issued a letter of instruction based on the fact that once he found out he was supposed to register as a lobbyist, he did comply and register as a lobbyist. I don't know, Mr. Coffey, if you would like.
May I offer a few comments?
Certainly, absolutely.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair and Honorable Commissioner. Factually, there's not much dispute with the report of the advocate. Just as an aside, Mr. Russo was not actually specifically hired for this project. He works on a monthly basis with Mr. Trump on environmental and land use issues. He's not their lobbyist. In this particular situation, it developed that their regular lobbyist, who is Carlos Jimenez Jr., was not available. And so Mr. Trump sort of kind of backed Mr. Russo into it, and he wasn't acquainted with the lobbying requirements. There's certainly no reason to believe that he considered anything he was doing to be lobbying, and as soon as he became aware of a requirement, he registered. So, for example, as the advocate points out, there was no lobbying of county staff. Simply informational exchange. The mayor was certainly not lobbied, and the vast majority of Mr. Russo's activities were purely informational. What it is suggested is that, in his view, again, not his understanding of lobbying, he provided informational exchanges with Mr. Matheson and with the Crandon Park Master Advisory Committee. And I would suggest, and I may be being somewhat mindful of what Joe alluded to, you do have a broad mission here. And I can certainly understand that Mr. Murawski's recommendation is very consistent with that mission, and that is to apply concepts of ethics and compliance broadly. But I would nevertheless suggest that this is a unique situation, and with the utmost respect to the advocate, I think a case could be made that this didn't violate anything. And just to put perspective here, the Crandon Park Master Advisory Committee is a unique creature. I don't think anyone would consider it a traditional county board or a traditional county committee. It wasn't created by ordinance. It was created and came out of a lawsuit, extensive litigation between the county and the Matheson family that led, as we know, to the creation of a wonderful world venue tennis tournament, among other things. But I think there's a not inconsiderable argument to be made that this would not have been strictly considered to be a county committee or a county board. It's, I think one of its members is appointed by a National Parks Commission, another by the Matheson family, two by the county. It's accorded sunshine status, which I think is appropriate. But just, in terms of expressing our position, which is most respectful with respect to the advocate's report and recommendation, I think there's an argument to be made that it is not a county committee or a county board that is subject to the lobbying ordinance, especially when we recognize that any form of sanction, which Mr. Murawski is not recommending, would have to contemplate a penal and strict construction of the ordinance. And I don't believe that applying those analysis that you would necessarily reach the result that this is a county committee or county board. In light of his recommendation, we don't need to reach that point, of course, assuming his recommendation is followed. And I would also suggest, just speaking on behalf of Mr. Russo, he had absolutely no idea that he was doing anything that would violate your ordinances. He obviously respects them. He registered, took the course before he spoke to any county commissioners about the matter. And he understands that you take, appropriately, I believe, a very broad view of your lobbying ordinance, and you want to give it a maximum impact. But I would just suggest that Mr. Russo was not being completely unreasonable in his view that he was not lobbying, in effect, anybody, because a more traditional view of the scope of lobbying might not be as broad as your ordinance. And there's Supreme Court decisions and other authorities that really look to lobbying as advocating before a decision maker on a specifically pending item, and that certainly didn't happen here. I think we all agree with that. So I would summarize by saying that Mr. Russo has some significant equities in his favor. I think ultimately a legal position that is not inconsiderable, but nevertheless his goal is to be compliant, to be respectful of your ordinances, your role, and we do not object to the recommendation that Mr. Murawski has presented, that the complaint be dismissed and that a letter of instruction be issued.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Coffey. A couple questions, Well, first I'll let my fellow commissioners if they have any questions.
No, please go ahead.
Mr. Russo, I'm a little bit unclear. So I heard, Mr. Coffey, that you mentioned that Mr. Trump's lobbyist is Mr. Jimenez Jr. Is that the mayor's son?
Yes, and for that reason, he was not available to assist with this. And so Mr. Russo sort of got grafted into an unfamiliar role.
And what's Mr. Russo's relationship to Mr. Trump? He's an attorney?
No, he's not an attorney. He is a consultant who's an environmental consultant, and most of his work, or as far as I know, the vast majority of his work deals with Doral and the Trump National Resort there and issues there. So this was a very unfamiliar and unexpected role for Mr. Russo.
But his purpose was to essentially substitute for the mayor's son as a lobbyist. I mean, I'm trying to just be clear. When you injected the name Jimenez Jr., obviously it draws attention to the fact that it sounds like very similar to the mayor's son. And you're telling me the mayor's son is the lobbyist of Trump, and then Mr. Russo was drafted because certainly there would be a direct conflict of interest, or let me not reach that conclusion, but there appears to be anyway. So wasn't Mr. Russo drafted to substitute as a lobbyist in this case, and did so without?
In his mind, it never got that far, because remember, they're
He just
very...
said it was an informational.
They're exchanging ideas, because there was never a specific proposal that the county was considering. There was never an agenda item, even for this, what we would submit as an unusual creature in creation, the Crandon Park Master Advisory Committee. So it never got to a point of traditional lobbying, and I assume if it had, as Mr. Russo described it and as the advocate confirmed, once he'd sort of really come to understand the processes, they might very well have retained a different lobbyist, or there are a few scenarios there. Not only did Mr. Jimenez Jr. exclude himself, but the mayor also excluded himself from anything to do with the issue.
Understood.
And I was, if I can add this, Mr. Chairman, I think that's one of the reasons that Mr. Russo was really not operating with the same knowledge that, for example, a regular lobbyist would have, or somebody who's in that line of work. He simply wasn't, and was involved in what he understood to be the initial information exchange role.
Has he ever been registered as a lobbyist anywhere that you're aware of?
To my knowledge, no. His first registration came after this issue surfaced, and he of course registered, as we've talked about, and then did meet with some of the county commissioners.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Coffey. Questions?
No.
No questions? Any questions?
At what point did he register to be a lobbyist again? At what point?
I believe it was February of this year.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So we'll go ahead and vote on the recommendation in open session. If you want to wait, Mr. Coffey, for that vote.
Okay.
Or you're welcome to leave.